everybody, it's me, Steve Schnee, the CD Junkie. Welcome to another episode of Collecting the 80s. This is a show where I just go through and I pull 10 random 80s albums. Well, I'm pulling them on CD. More than likely, you're probably going to find them on vinyl out in the wild. And what I'm trying to do is, if anybody wants to get into the 80s and they just don't know where to start, I'm first off showing a lot of the more popular artists. A good gateway into either their catalog or into 80s music. I will sprinkle in some obscure things or some unexpected items. This video has two of those at the end, but we're going to start off with some of the those albums. I look at all of these as very communal. These are things that a lot of people have been into. You know, you walk into a 80s club or a record store back in the 80s and all the people were talking about these artists, and this is, I think, the best way to approach this. So let's just dive into this so I don't keep you waiting anymore. These are 10 more great albums to get into if you're diving into the 80s. Remember, these are just my opinion, and trust me, I've got thousands of examples here to show you. So I'm just going to do it 10 at a time, so these videos will be short. We're going to start off with the specials. Now, a lot of people say, well, that was, what, 1979? Yeah, my 80s is basically 78, 77 to about 86. So that's my window there, a little bit earlier than 1980 and only a little bit halfway through the decade. That's where I thought the music was the most exciting. So the specials, 1979, one of the original two-tone movement ska revival bands. Of course, Terry Hall, frontman. Jerry Dahmers was the keyboard player and sort of the guy behind Two-Tone Records. And it's not as bright and cheery as, let's say, Madness and English Beat and Bad Manners. This is more political, more straightforward, more serious, but still lots of great songs. This happens to be the 2 CD expanded version, but this was a different cover than the American one. I'll show you the American one right now. Now let's move on to the next title. This is an artist, the first or second album, I went back and forth, but I decided let's go with the most popular of the two, because this is a great gateway into the 80s. I'm talking Tears for Fears, Songs from the Big Chair. This is a wonderful album, really a lot of depth to it. The first album was fantastic. I prefer that album song-wise, but the textures and the emotions that came out in this album. Everybody Wants to Rule the World used to be one of the most overplayed songs of the 80s, and I had to step away from it for many, many years, for decades. And then when I went back and listened to it again, it hit me just like it did back in, 84 or so when this came out. This happens to be the 2 CD expanded edition, but you will be able to find that on vinyl or, single disc or whatever. Let's go on to the next one here. We're talking about this year's model. It's the second album from Elvis Costello, the first album by Elvis Costello and the Attractions. I wanted to choose Get Happy. That's my favorite Elvis Costello album. And then I thought, well, that's not a great example of the Elvis Costello sound. I mean, it is, but if you want to dive into and see what Elvis Costello really was all about, when he first came on the scene, of course, My Aim is True, the debut album, but this is a wonderful album. This is the 2 CD version here. I would highly recommend this. I would highly recommend any of the first 4 or 5 Elvis Costello. I mean, he's a great artist all the way through his career, but if you're going to get into the late 70s and early 80s, I'd say this year's model is a wonderful introduction. Let's go to Depeche Mode. Speak and Spell was my entry. Me and my high school friends back in 81 or so, and I thought, well, let's pick an album that's more in between their early days and then the more sophisticated. So I chose Construction Time again. This is their third album. This has Everything Counts in Large Amounts, which is one of my favorite Depeche Mode songs. I just remember with every album, you just hear this growth of the band. But this here, I think, is a great sound of the 80s. It was a great example of what Depeche Mode was capable of, both melodic and moody, and also with Alan Wilder, very creative, and just the aural landscapes he would create on each Depeche Mode album was incredible. So that's definitely I think, a good gateway into the 80s and into the world of Depeche Mode. If you are looking for some punk, some great punk, now normally I don't pick compilation albums for this. I pick studio albums. But for us Americans, this was the very first album released in the U.S. by this band. I'm talking about Buzzcocks, Singles Going Steady. A very intelligent way to introduce a band. They put all the A-sides, or the first 7 singles or whatever, in order, and side 2 of the album was all the B-sides in order. And the CD, if you end up getting the CD, it also adds the singles that were released after Singles Going Steady, and then, right up until their breakup. This is Pete Shelley and Steve Diggle with some of their best material. This is the, no pun intended, like the buzzsaw guitars. This is the great punk sound, but great pop hooks and melodies. And I think Buzzcocks, in terms of singles bands, they're right up there with the Undertones and the Ramones as just putting out some great, fantastic stuff. I love their albums. The first 3 albums, my favorite is A Different Kind of Tension, but I think as an introduction, let's go with the American debut album, and that's Singles Going Steady. Now, all their stuff was eventually released in the U.S. And now, if you love synth pop and top 40 synth pop, this band had a big hit. I'm talking about Men Without Hats, but they're more than the Safety Dance. I know everyone's into the Safety Dance, or they're not into the Safety Dance. It doesn't matter, because Ivan and the boys were just great pop songwriters, very unique. There's no other band that sounded like Men Without Hats to this day. And this is just a great album filled with great melodies, humor, inventiveness, and it's a great, great pop album. I think Men Without Hats are sorely overlooked because they are very creative and they put out some great music. Next, I'm going to go for a band that a lot of people know for one song, and that's In a Big Country. I'm talking about the band Big Country. This is the album The Crossing. Now, of course, this is the deluxe edition with stickers on the front and everything. This album cover came in a couple different colors. The original one that I bought was blue color. I've seen it in red, green, obviously. But this is fantastic. This is Stuart Adamson, who was the guitar player for the Skids, a great Scottish band, the Skids, and Big Country. People talked about, Stuart Adamson and Bruce Watson's, bagpipe sounding guitars, but great songs. Stuart Adamson had a great voice. Definitely a band to check out. This does have In a Big Country, but also has Chance. It has Fields of Fire. Great, great songs. This is a solid album. Definitely their best, and I'd say one of the best albums of the 80s. The next album is absolutely classic. I remember buying it roughly about 2 weeks after it came out because I hadn't heard anything from it yet, and I hadn't bought the first 2 albums by this band, but this here is incredible. I'm talking about Parallel Lines by Blondie. This is the album with Heart of Glass, Sunday Girl, Hanging on the Telephone, One Way or Another. Solid from beginning to end. This is a just energetic and fun, and it's got punky attitude, but it's also very, very pop, very melodic. I have 2 versions of this. I have this version that has bonus tracks, and then I also have another version which has even more stuff on it. But I need to keep this one because it's the original album cover. So, and that's such a classic album cover. Don't know if you can really see that. But then let's get into sort of the odd ducks of this episode. Both of these albums are incredible, but one of them, the first one I'm going to show you, is by a band that a lot of people may not be familiar with out there. So when you're getting into the 80s, this is a great band because they're sophisticated, they're smart, they're original. I'm talking about Prefab Sprout. This is their second album, produced by Thomas Dolby, who you all know through Blinded Me with Science and Europa and the Pirate Twins, and great albums. This is incredible. It is thoughtful. It is a multi-layered. You discover new things every time you listen to it, even 40 years later. It's an absolutely wonderful album. Now, some of you may be going, Prefab Sprout, Steve McQueen. I don't know an album by Prefab Sprout called Steve McQueen. Well, here in America, it was released as Two Wheels Good, because I guess they figured American audiences would think like, oh my God, Steve McQueen has an album out called Prefab Sprout. Really incredible stuff. It's just deep and thoughtful and fan-friggin-tastic. The last album I'm going to talk about, it's not an odd duck. It's an album that sold probably better than most of these albums, but it's an album that you may not think of when you think of sort of new wave energy and stuff like that. I'm talking about Wings, Back to the Egg. This is an album for the ages. It's my favorite Paul McCartney solo album, per se. And, you know, people used to make fun of it and go, oh, that's Paul McCartney's punk album. Well, there's nothing punk about it. This was an album, you know, he had put out London Town in 78. Now, London Town was more of a smooth, relaxed album. This is, he had gotten 2 new band members, Lawrence Juber, Steve Holley, and re-energized the band. So it's got that edgy sort of new wave influence. It doesn't sound new wave because there's nothing really new wave about this except the energy. So you're getting almost like a revitalized Paul McCartney. This, I think, was his best album since Band on the Run. Now, I love Venus and Mars more than I love Band on the Run, and I love parts of Speed of Sound, and I loved London Town, but this, I think, is just because it's energetic. It's like Paul saying, like, you know, let's not make such a clean, smooth sounding album. Let's put some energy into the music again. And Back to the Egg is the album that I chose. And it's just wonderful. All of the stuff is wonderful. Remember, these are my opinions. These are albums that if you are choosing to get into 80s music and you don't know where to turn, go through these. Go through any of the titles that I pick for this series called Collecting the 80s. It's really all about getting in touch with this music again, you know, revisiting it. You know, if you were a fan back in the day and you haven't listened in a while, it's reminding you, hey, go check this out. But it's also saying, come on. If you're scared of the 80s because you think it's just all hairstyles and funny clothes, it's a lot more than that. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. Remember to like, comment, share, subscribe, ring that bell for future notifications. And until the next time, remember me. I'm Steve Schnee, the CD Junkie. Now, what are you doing still sitting there? It's time for you to start your journey in collecting the 80s. I swear.